Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Common Council meeting. Roll call, please.
Fire. Facial. Here. Rosendich.
Here.
Bargender.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
Witzel.
Here.
Fisher.
Here.
Spiros.
Here.
Budke.
Here.
Pendler.
Here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item number 3, citizens' comments. Anyone here for citizens' comments? Please, Mr. Fletty.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Hello. Excellent. All right. I'm Pete Fletty, Acting Chief for the Marshfield Fire and Rescue Department. I just want to take a moment, if I can, to address an issue that occurred on Saturday, October 31st. While the police and fire and rescue departments were escorting the Marshfield cross-country team out of town for the state championship. So on October 30th, 2020, we received an email from a resource officer at Marshfield High School asking if the fire department intended on participating in an escort for the Marshfield cross-country team headed down for the state championship. The event was to take place on Saturday, October 31st at 10 o'clock. I made the decision to send an engine in the escort and place the event on the calendar for Saturday, October 31st at 10. Based on statements from the lieutenant on the engine crew involved in the Marshfield cross-country team escort, the planned route was to head out of town from the high school, west on Becker Road to Central, south on Central, to the first roundabout at the south end of Marshfield. The engine would then stop the escort at that time and use the roundabout to make their way back into the city. This is a typical route for these types of events. At some point on Central Avenue, it appears a political rally or parade ended up on the tail end of the high school cross-country team escort. This gave some citizens the appearance that the Marshfield Police Department and Marshfield Fire and Rescue Department were leading a political rally and parade. I can assure you that the Marshfield Fire and Rescue Department had no knowledge of the political event happening in Marshfield on October 31st, 2020. And I also want to make it clear the Marshfield Fire and Rescue Department did not coordinate with anyone or lead a political rally or parade. Our mission was to escort our student athletes out of town for the cross-country state championship. The Marshfield Fire and Rescue Department has and always will remain apolitical. We are in the business of protecting and preserving lives and property, no matter your political affiliation, race, gender, creed, or sexual orientation. We respect and will be present and ready to protect all citizens and visitors of Marshfield. We regret that the Marshfield cross-country team escort was misconstrued into something it wasn't. We have and always will continue to support our local athletes, and we are very proud of them. The unfortunate part of this incident is it took the attention away from our student athletes who we're trying to honor. The Marshfield cross-country team has our sincerest apologies, and we want them to know we are proud of them and all their accomplishments. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public? Mr. Budke.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I was part of that, seeing the girls and boys cross-country teams out. I was following the bus, the police car and the bus, and I can assure you that they were there strictly for the kids. They were not involved with anything political at all. And I think it was a very nice event that's been going on for quite some time, and the kids really feel good about it. So there was nothing wrong with what happened there.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Good evening, Pat Seps with the Marshfield Police Department. The only thing I can add to what Assistant Chief Fletty had offered was there was no official type of parade or any permit like that. We received a heads up. I spoke to the two on-duty shift lieutenants. This was strictly a group of individuals that were going to drive through the city. They were fully aware that they were going to have to obey all signs, signals, traffic laws, and everything like that. So, in speaking to the lieutenant that was on duty that day, it appeared to be absolutely coincidental. They could not have known we were doing that. So, but I just wanted the council to know that there was no organized parade or any type of event like that. It was purely coincidental. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? No, just briefly, I have two. It's very interesting, and we all know that tomorrow's election day, so I hope you go out and vote. Deb Hall has made sure that all the precincts will be running well and they're going to be safe. So we encourage you, if you are going to go out, wear your mask, but bring your IDs, be socially distant with each other. We really do need to take that very, very seriously. And I will say, since Deb is here and she wasn't here that other night, what you and your staff have done this year has been nothing shy of amazing. And I mean, thank you so much for what you do. I was going by here Sunday morning at around 7:30, and I'm driving by, and whose light is on but Deb's in her office. And your effort shows. And so thank you very much. I would like to say to the council, and I don't know, Steve, if you've sent that letter yet off to the council that we received over the weekend from the Marshfield Clinic Health Systems. But I think we're all aware that the virus is here and the numbers are rising. Last week on Friday, there was over 5,000. Different today, I think there was about 3,400. And what this has done now is to our medical systems, it's beginning to overload them. They're having more and more people go into the emergency room, more and more people go in, and of course, their staff is affected. And because we are getting anywhere from 40 to 60 new infections a day just in Wood County, it's even overwhelming Wood County health systems. They can't do the contact tracing that they want to do. They're overwhelmed. So we are just asking everyone, please, when you go out, wear a mask. Nobody is trying to infringe on anybody's rights or anything like that, but please do wear a mask. If you don't, or even if you do, if you cough or sneeze, cover your mouth. At the polling places tomorrow, there'll be plenty of hand sanitizer and everything like that. If you're sick, stay home. If your kids are sick, stay home. We're going to get through this, but it's going to take everybody to work on it. And we have to take it very seriously because it is negatively affecting our health system as well as the Wood County Health District, and we need their help. Having said that, there are no other citizens' comments, so we'll go to item D, continue consideration of the recommended 2021 budget. Ed Wagner, Chairman of the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee, presiding.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the end of the session last week, we had left a number of things for staff to work on and get back to us. Some of the things were direct questions about specific line items. Others were, I think, very generalized comments about the larger pictures of both funds. As you recall, we're dealing with two separate levies. We're dealing with one levy for the debt service, and I think our choices were between 45 and 77 cents per thousand on that. And I think the budget recommendation was 45 cents, if I recall. And then there was a separate levy for operations. Well, I think the 45 cents included the operations levy too, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, the first thing we're going to do tonight is get a staff report on what they found and what they are recommending. And after that, we will probably, well, I think we'll have ongoing discussion as they're presenting it too. So basically, I think Steve Barg is going to make this presentation. Steve, can you come up and start off and let us know? I had a list of 5 things. I'll see how many you remembered because I forgot them, all of them. So go ahead.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Wagner. And this is intended really to be your meeting. I know the staff has spoken a lot at the first 2 meetings, the presentation that was made, and then a lot of the other data that's been given to you by the finance director and others along the way. But this is mainly for you. But we want to give you a good update on what's happened since the last meeting. And it's largely just reporting on responses to the questions that were raised by the council, as was just mentioned by Ed a minute ago. The first one, and probably the biggest one that was discussed at the last meeting, was travel and training budgets. And you do have, I gave you a packet. If you flip to the back of the first page, you'll see the chart that you'd seen that shows travel and training, the staff travel in the middle there, 53,330, that's for the members of departments. Apart from the department head, 128,000. But then you see the chart also includes the travel and training for the department head. To the left of that, to the right of that, travels for boards and commissions. In some cases, we have some boards and commissions whose members are encouraged to attend or required to attend certain training. and you see a couple of other things there too. But the focus really was on the travel and training and what's reasonable in this difficult financial situation. So if you have on the very front page, what I gave you is the suggested expense reduction. What happened really was I met with, or had contact in other ways, email, phone calls, with all of our various department and division heads. They were very receptive. They looked into their budgets and tried to look, as I did with the administration department, as to what we could do without in this year. In other words, I know that the mayor's mentioned and others have mentioned there's certain things you have to do to keep up your certifications and your licenses. But then beyond that, some courses, some trainings, some seminars, workshops that are valuable and produce a lot of worth to us. And then there's other ones that do as well. But, you say, well, maybe I go to the spring conference, but not the fall conference, or vice versa, trying to cut back where we can. And again, I want to say that I really truly believe in training. And I think, the way it's projected here, it'll be about 0.5% of our overall budget for investment into our staff in terms of these seminars and conferences. And I think they produce good value. I know a lot of our department heads come back with new ideas, creative thoughts that they can put into play and cost-saving measures. But what you see there, you see where we started, and that's all three of those groups I mentioned combined, about $170,000. And then you see the reductions, which come to $51,000. So about 30% of the travel and training budget has been reduced in this chart by working with the staff leaders, leaving a revised figure of 118. And again, don't compare the 118 to the 128 that we talked about last time. Compare it to the full 170 that covered all three of those categories. So that would be the suggestion, that we could reduce $51,319 in travel and training by implementing the items you see on that list. And as you see, virtually everybody participated in some way for the most part. There might be a couple that had issues of certifications where they couldn't, but almost every cost center was a part of this. Then below that, I've got other reductions that we looked at. We may have mentioned that there's an employee that we believe was going to take family health insurance that is not going to have to do that. They've got other options for their insurance. Also look at reducing or eliminating, it says seasonal parks intern. It should just say seasonal park employee. It's not an intern, it's a summer person who would work in the parks for about $7,000. Talked to Josh about nuisance abatement. I know that the council is very keen on trying to take down dilapidated buildings and those kind of things, but all we have right now in the budget is $5,000. And quite frankly, if you're going to want to take one of these on, we're going to need to look at other funding sources to make that happen. And we're still committed to trying to work those out when need be. Technology, we're looking at getting a software system online so that we can have it more readily done, updating the ordinances. I think, Plan Commission is often making updates. Other departments and other boards and commissions do that as well. They come through the council. This would be an easier way to get that done without as much staff time and be probably more effective, and the updates would be more frequent to our municipal code. And then $1,000 employee education from my budget. That's largely monies that we would be able to do staff training. I know one time we did some staff leaders, we did some team building and some of those kind of things. But in this environment, we would forego that for 2021. So that totals about $38,000. If you put the two together, it comes to about $90,000 in reductions to the general fund budget. By the way, I should mention that others outside of the general fund are also participating in this, and they've given me ideas for reductions, but we focus right now on the general fund. So if you look at that, I've got a line down toward the bottom of that front page that says total general fund expenditures equals 2020 budget. If you were to adopt this right now with that $90,000 in cuts, you would literally be within a few dollars of the general fund expenses for 2021 being exactly the same as 2020. $22,595,000 and change. And you'd be saying to the world, we spent no more dollars than we spent in the previous year. Additional revenue to work with. I think we mentioned at the last meeting that the assessed value is going up from 0.2%, which is what we expected, to 0.7%. Doesn't sound like a big increase, but it would produce about $75,000 in additional revenue from that increase in assessed value. And then I've talked to the players, if you will, involved in the Economic Development Fund. We call it the 205 Fund internally here. That's a fund of roughly $1 million, give or take, at any given time, that's managed and overseen by the Economic Development Board for projects that involve residential, commercial, industrial, things that build and develop our community. And I floated the idea of the Economic Development Board making a contribution from that fund to the city's general fund to the city budget, quite frankly, annually. And $25,000 is the amount I threw out there. Josh Miller, definitely, and sometimes other staff members do work on behalf of the EDB. They take some of the ideas and do a lot of the legwork to come back to the next committee meeting and try and put proposals together. So it really would be a way, kind of similar to what we do with EMS and wastewater, except they're enterprise funds, but of representing and respecting the fact that fund transfer from that economic development account to the city proper would make some sense. And I've talked about it with the Economic Development Board president and utilities representatives, and they all understand and appreciate that as a viable idea. So at the end, you're looking at revenue different than the original proposal, or I should say revenue and expense together from the original proposal that you saw a couple weeks ago of about $190,000. And I mentioned to you before that $130,000 is roughly 1% on the tax rate. I did give that to you as a reference. I'm not advocating that you do anything different to the 4.5% tax rate that was proposed, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I'd like to call Ron Allman up right now because one of the other funds we talked about looking at was the internal service fund. Could there be monies taken from that and reallocated for use in the general fund? And I'm going to let Ron touch on what has come out of that discussion.
Sure, and thank you. Just a real quick overview of the internal service fund again is it's a fuel dump and maintenance and equipment maintained by the streets department. And they use the state of Wisconsin rate to charge it out to the general fund as they use it. And it runs pretty true that they're able to replace equipment and keep up instead of borrowing for that. So what we look at quite a few options. I think the first one I crossed off is just a straight transfer to the general fund. I think we learned the hard way that taking money out of this pocket and putting it in this pocket and calling it revenue doesn't work out so well. But we really wanted to stick true to the spirit of the rule, which to me is how could we use $100,000 internal service funds to kind of help out here? So we looked around, and what we came up with, what we're proposing is that we would look at our borrowing list and take $105,000 off our borrowing list. So we borrow $105,000 less and just have the internal service fund purchase those items with the cash. And the three items we picked because they were not street projects or big projects, traffic signal interconnect, LED, and the stormwater master plan. So we plan on borrowing for all those. Instead, we would just have the internal service fund purchase this. So to us, that moves the needle because it reduces our borrowing and ticks down our levy needed for debt in the future. So not an immediate impact, but it moves it in the right direction. So any questions on that?
Ron, excuse me. So if you take that out, I mean, $109,000 out of borrowing, what is that going to, you have any rough idea what that would do in principal and interest, what it would do, or is this, is it going to reduce it? I think you're right. I think it's insignificant.
Right. But anytime we can borrow $100,000 less, we pay for it cash now instead of borrowing and paying it for 10 years with interest. I think, I didn't calculate it, but that's, I think, a good use of that money.
Okay, you're still planning on spending from the internal service fund $650,000 this year, right? Is that 100 and some odd thousand that you're just talking about? Is that added to that? Is that going to be, we're going to be spending more than the $650,000 on the internal service fund?
I guess that's more of a Chris question and what direction would you like us to take? My understanding would that instead of $650,000, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, is we apply $100,000 this way, leaving $550 for equipment replacement in 2021. So anytime you deal with this fund, it's kind of a long way around, but so we're reducing cash by $100,000, we're reducing borrowing, and we're reducing future levy. Again,
the cash you're reducing is in the internal service.
Correct.
Which then is paid back by the projects at the time of the equipment rental and that sort of thing?
Correct. So assume our state of Wisconsin schedule is perfectly true, which is that it runs pretty true, and I think it's pretty good. So it'll replenish. So we'll replace less equipment this year, but it'll replenish and go back to normal.
Go ahead and proceed. Anybody else? Tom, did you want to talk while I think this through a bit? Go ahead.
Sure.
How's that? Better? I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but what you have projected for buying new equipment, could we hear, Chris, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. Tell me about the existing equipment that we have. High maintenance, what's going on there? I think I know the answer, but I need to hear it.
And always come up here. I'd recommend doing a street building tour at any time if you want to see the actual equipment. It's kind of telling if you go down there.
Oh, yeah. Been there.
So right now, our big ticket item is our sweeper. Basically, it's 9 years old. It's got 8,000 hours on it, so it reached its limit. We spent $60,000 in repair last year. It's a 2-engine sweeper. Meaning we have an engine that runs the chassis and an engine that runs the sweeper. And all the newer stuff is a 1-engine sweeper for the chassis, and the sweeper itself is run by hydraulics. So a lot of the maintenance and repair costs are in that second engine or one of the engines. So that unit right now, we have criteria that we grade them out. It's scored a 33, which would put it in a needs immediate consideration category. And
you sold me on that.
Okay. Unit 64, one of our single axle trucks, is 25 years old with over 150,000 miles on it. Of course, the truck is below average to poor. And what we would do is purchase another single axle truck and upgrade it with a new salter. Currently we have 2 old salters, the belt driven type salters, and we would upgrade that fleet to a auger driven salter. And that one is actually, the score on that one is 42 points, which puts it in the past consideration backlog category. Unit 102 is only 4 years old. That's has 1,200 hours on it. That's one of our John Deere tractors. Right now, it's great for a mowing machine, but it's not industrialized enough for our winter operations. In the last 4 years, we put $6,000 into that piece of equipment. That tractor in the wintertime is constantly being repaired when we're out doing sidewalks and brooming off sidewalks and snow blowing. So we were looking at replacing that with a more industrialized piece of equipment. Of course, want to replace a shop truck. 78 shop truck is 15 years old. It's got 98,000 miles on it, and it's pretty badly rusted up. One of the Park and Recs has a tractor that they want to convert. It's a single season tractor. It's 21 years old with over 3,100 hours on it. It's used mainly for athletic field maintenance. Then it gets stored for winter months. Ben proposed to get a new one with a box blade on it, fork and stuff, and use it during winter operations also. And then unit 5, asset number 5 is another pickup truck. It is for the facilities maintenance truck, and we are proposing to swap that vehicle out with a used police or fire truck. So.
Quick question, if I could.
Go ahead, Mr. Bucky.
Chris, it sounds good. The one I might question a little bit, the tractor mower blower, that's for doing sidewalks.
Yes.
Did we hire that out?
No, we take care of all of our own sidewalks now. We have 4 miles of our own city-owned sidewalks that it's spread out throughout the whole city, and now we do all the sidewalks and parking lots here. So, okay. Along with the bump outs and all the stuff on Veterans Parkway, Central. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Anybody? Mr. Bargender.
Thank you, Chair. Asset number 64, I believe that you've told us in the past on Public Works that single axle dump truck is the oldest unit in the fleet?
Yes.
Okay. My question is that truck getting used much anymore?
Yes, it's actually out on the fleet for we all black dirt. Actually, 64 pulls the chipper truck. When we're out in forestry operations, that one has, pulls the chipper behind it and it has the cab for it so you can blow the chips in it, so.
So, but
In
is
the
that being
summertime, it's
used?
used for topsoilings, usually hauls black dirt. In the wintertime, it's a forestry truck.
So it is used every week?
Possibly, it can be, yes, I would say.
Or is it used more as a backup vehicle in case?
It is also a backup vehicle for our snowplow. If we have a snowplow truck that goes down, we have a couple vehicles that we, if it goes in for maintenance, hey, grab the other truck, throw the plow in.
So more or less used lightly and then as a backup?
Yeah, I'd say medium.
Is that, or medium? Okay. Is there any major problems with that truck right now? That it couldn't go out next week and do its job?
Yeah, it could go out and do its job, but like I said, it's 25 years old. And,
I understand.
yeah, and I didn't pull up the maintenance records on it. I could check my score to see what it is, but.
I mean, it's $180,000. I mean,
yeah,
it's not, it's a big amount. That's why I'm kind of picking on it. Just kind of wondering, do we really need it right now? I mean, can you get a year or two out of it, so we can get past some of this COVID issue, financial issues and budget issues? That's all I'm asking. Is that something we can put off? Will we get 2 more years out of it? I mean, it don't have a lot of miles on, really, 25 years, not getting any miles. I mean, a lot of this equipment, it's 9 years old. I mean, a lot of this is very little hours, according to what real commercial equipment would get.
Yeah, it's not
out in the commercial world. I mean, when I look at unit asset number 112, it's a 21-year-old John Deere utility tractor with only 3,100 hours. I mean, that's not very many hours for 21 years.
Yeah.
So, sure, yeah, we'd like to buy all brand new all the time. But I mean, obviously some of this equipment, if you used it for 21 years, there's got to be a year or two left in it. I mean, they're going to sell it used on the secondary market. I mean, you're not junking the stuff, so.
Yeah, it's kind of twofold with this truck because we look at upgrading our one of our oldest salters from.
And I understand, I totally understand the needs, okay? I totally do. And I very much appreciate, using my recommendation from Public Works about repurposing police vehicles into these fleets, especially on very little or lightly used vehicles like this Dakota truck. 14 years old, it's only got 89,000 miles, and I assume you bought it used at the time, or the city bought it used at the time it had miles on it, right?
Yes.
Okay, so, it's a great thing, to incorporate these police vehicles. I know, I thought I read somewhere that the police department was buying a couple of new vehicles. I don't know if you guys are aware of it, that they're gonna have a couple more. I don't know if Pat can relate to this. If Pat wants to come up there, there's a couple of vehicles that are coming up. Can we use these vehicles in the city fleets?
That is correct. We'll have about 5 vehicles total that we'll sell this year. We did sell one to communications, which worked out really well. We're open to whatever works for the city as far as if there's a department that can use those vehicles. Otherwise, we typically put them on Wisconsin surplus. So either way, they're getting sold. A lot of these vehicles, they're not the ones typically coming right off the line. We hold them and we actually kind of filter them down through our PSLOs, our school resource officers, training vehicles. So it really depends on the mileage. We're trying to hold them on the road till around 100,000. That way, they could go longer, but you're starting to talk about safety issues when you're talking about an emergency response vehicle. But to answer the question, we'll have vehicles for sale this year. And if there's any other city department that would benefit from that, we'll certainly talk to them.
Anybody? Now, Mr. Alman's back up there, just got a question. Okay, I noticed we're talking about, buying some stuff out of CIP too in here, and.
Can I continue with where we're at though for just a second, if I may?
Sure.
I acted like I was done with that travel and training part. I wasn't actually totally. First of all, I want to commend Chris and actually superintendents before him. They've always done a nice job of putting together that information so you can see the top priority items, the number of miles, the useful life, the maintenance history, and that's very helpful in making these decisions. And we bring this to CIP as well. So I just want to note a couple things. If you look at that list I gave you, you'll see about a third of the way down council and, reduction in the council's training and travel budget. And what that is the money is in there for all the council members and has been for a while to go to the annual league conference, but that rarely happens. Some years we might get as many as 5 or 6, some years less. So just kind of cut that down a little bit to make reference to the fact that we probably won't see more than a half a dozen people sign up. I'd encourage everybody to go. I mean, it's great training if you can go, but that doesn't usually happen here. Excuse me? Oh, okay. All right. So I'd note that. And then also within the council budget, it's not training, but I want to note this again. You do realize that the non-governmental organizations are in there. I put them in there as you directed, and I'm not suggesting anything different. I still think as time goes on, you want to take a look at those and see if how they compare to some of the staff needs. But I just want to remind you that that's part of your annual budget. And if you do ever want to do anything there, I think we'd be fair to give people advance notice before making any reductions to those grants or allocations we make. So beyond that, I want to reference one more thing the mayor has brought up, and that is how much of this travel and training ties to certifications, licenses, recertifications, and that. I don't have an actual dollar amount. I've gotten some information from some of the staff, and I'm still putting it together. I can tell you it's obviously less than the amount you might think, although I'm not sure exactly what you think, but but there's a lot of training that goes into things and people keeping up on things that doesn't lead to licenses and certificates. But if you look at the top 2 categories, fire and police, you'll see that is where the lion's share rest. And Pat could speak to this if need be, and I know Pete could speak to the fire department part. As far as some of the training they do, police officers need to go through 24 hours per year, to keep their certification as peace officers. A lot of the fire stuff that comes through here is things with hazmat, confined space entry, and those kind of things that may not be legally required, but they're essential to the job we expect them to perform, to keep up their status as trained performers of those services. So if you put it all together and then you take in some licenses, even down to the pool, you have lifeguards who have to be certified and CPR and all that, you're probably looking at a number maybe, a quarter of the total starting budget of the 170, somewhere in that range. But I do apologize for not having that exact number. I would take any questions on anything related to training and travel.
Mr. Bucky, go ahead.
Steve, what happened on some of these? I'll use the council for an example here.
Right.
It was virtual for the conference this last year. And there's some of the other ones that I'm sure didn't happen because of the COVID. Where'd that money go?
It just remains unused, and it'll go into our surplus at the end of the year if we have one.
General fund?
General fund, yeah. It's as if anything just wasn't used. You budget $5,000, you don't use it, it lapses into the general fund at year end unless it's repurposed.
So my question would be, why aren't we using it to carry over for the next year for this then?
Well, that's not generally the way we do it.
But this isn't generally a normal year.
True. I mean, I guess, Ron, you want to address that?
Yeah, I think the easy answer is it'll just reduce we budgeted deficit in the general fund in 2020. So it just, we're a little more money ahead, and we wouldn't carry it over because it wouldn't be a continuing appropriation.
I know that for our bond rating and stuff, they want undesignated money in that fund. But basically how that fund gets built up is overcharging for things that we do. And I'm not saying anybody's doing it on purpose, but it would be nice if there was excess funds that we would find a use for it to help offset the next year. If something costs less, it's a hard one because you do need that built up. I get that, but this whole thing, we're in a different year. I mean, I wouldn't be asking all these questions if it was a normal year.
Sure. You're talking general fund, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I did give a presentation to finance, budget, and personnel, kind of estimating how 2020 looks. Revenue-wise, we're pretty good. We lost some user fees, a lot of interest, but staff's been great at tracking down grants. So our revenue is pretty close to true, and our expenses to date are down because of all the things that were closed, you know, closing Hefco Pool, shutting the library down for a little bit of while, reduced overtime. So we are trending ahead at this point, but you never know what November and December bring.
But don't you think, Ron, with this, we're talking travel and training. If we don't use it, why shouldn't it go back into the same thing for the following year?
I'll take that. I think what Ron is trying to say is, in a year where we didn't use any general fund reserves to balance the budget, in other words, we basically borrowed from ourselves to make the budget balance. I think it would probably make more sense to say, well, let's carry it over next year. We don't have to tax the people so much. That money was a plug number we used from ourselves to try and get through the year. All we're doing is reducing the amount we use. It's not even, I mean, it exists, but it's not really, it's a different kind of thing. We're just reducing the amount of our own general fund reserves that we use. It's not like we're at no use of reserves to balance the budget. I think that might be a slightly different scenario.
Yeah, somebody brought up in the past, you know, and I don't think it happens at all, Chris, now, but I know years ago, all of a sudden they were buying supplies when they wanted to use up their budget. I just have a problem when you have money that you didn't use and then you're asking for more the next year. I mean, to me, it should be carried over.
Steve, if I might, I had a question. Mr. Alman's right. We did get briefed on this in finance, budget, and personnel, and I went back and checked. The city does have a policy. His policy was written quite a while ago, 1987. And the thing, there's a list of things and how it approves what can be carried over and what can't. Most of it has to go through, if you want it carried over, you got to go through finance, budget, and personnel. It can't be just put in there and said, oh, we're carrying it over. The other thing that's interesting about it is there are things that are not included, specifically not included, and they're the things that Mr. Bucky is talking about. And that is all unexpended operation and maintenance expenditures, appropriations, all excess revenues above the estimated revenues that were projected in the annual budget, and appropriations for capital outlay that did not involve construction and did not require any future contractual obligation. So, right, that was the first one I read was it. So, and there's a reason for doing that. And Mr. Alman just pointed out that we've got a situation now where we're showing that we're running at a deficit at the end of the year. And what's going to happen is we're going to fill in that deficit with our reserves. That money goes back in the reserves and gets used to fund part of it and reduces the amount that we have to take out of the general fund account balance for this. So I understand what you're saying, and it seems to make a lot of sense, but it works the same way if you budget for the same thing the next year. It really, it's pay me now or pay me later, really. Okay.
I do understand that this year because we did take money out of there, but it shouldn't happen every year.
And we do continuing appropriations. That's what Ron was talking about. So let's say, like the year we were going to do the 5-year financial plan with our financial advisor, we didn't get to it. There were some things came up. We asked you guys if we could carry it over from one budget year to the next to expend those monies. They were already pre-planned. And, you know, I suppose technically we could do it with anything. We generally do it if there's purchases or services that for some reason we can't get the right price or we don't get a chance to make it happen. So it's pretty limited. The number of, if you look at the resolution we do every year, there's usually only a handful of items on there besides the fund balance carryovers.
The mayor would like to be recognized next.
So, Steve, on this, you just said something very interesting. You said if it was just certifications or recertifications, it would probably be 25% of the original 169. Does that sound about right?
That, yeah.
I really wish, because I thought that's what I asked for. I thought I asked for it very clearly, was to find out what those are. So I guess what you're saying is then if we just went down to that, it'd be about 42 or 43,000 as opposed to the 118.
Perhaps less. I mean, if you think about some of the things I talked about with fire and the training, do they have to do the training next year to be trained on hazmat? Maybe not. Do they need to keep up on the latest techniques and the latest applications? Yeah. So would that be a certification or recertification? Perhaps not. But no, if you went down to what you're talking about, it would probably be less than that. And if you give us that direction, we will we will, reduce to whatever that dollar amount is.
There's no way we can give you that direction yet because we don't have the information that we requested. And the reason I asked for it very specifically is there's something else that we have to do with employees and stuff like that. So I'm looking for money to save in one area or the other. I do not want to cut any, because you mentioned fire and police are the lion's share of this. I'm not looking to cut anything in regards to safety or anything that those folks need for certifications, recertifications, training. I know they do a lot of extra stuff and we need to support that. I 100% do. But at the same time, we need to know what the number is so that we can reallocate somewhere else possibly. Because if you're telling me you're asking for 118,000, but it could be 40, that's a $78,000 swing. What is that 78,000? What is that? And so that's where it's a little frustrating that we don't know that because we can't just say, okay, cut it to this. That's not fair. That's why we gave it back to the department heads so that they can make those cuts. I can't go to any of those different departments and say, okay, just cut this. They're the ones that know. So.
No, and I apologize. You should have that number in front of you at this point. And, I was caught doing a lot of this other stuff along the way. But I mean, I think you can expect for most of the departments below fire and police that the lion's share are not really certifications or recertifications. The lion's share are professional conferences, seminars, workshops, and other types of things. I've got a list of things. For example, Chris Holly, who was up here earlier, gave me a note on some of the things that they do and some of the certifications that they maintain for some of the different public works activities they do. I don't have, indication exactly. I didn't talk to him about it today, but as to what training sessions lead to what certifications. But a lot of what you're seeing here from a lot of the departments is ongoing training of skills. So, I mean, if you decide at the end that you want to reduce the tax rate by some amount, we can get that number and just plug it in. If you decide you want to do something else with said monies, we can still get that number and plug it into whatever you want to do with it, whether it be general fund, whether it be tax rate relief or whatever. But it's going to be in that lower end. It's going to be definitely on that lower end.
Okay.
You still have the floor. Bush. Are you done?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay, I thought you. Okay. Okay, Steve, you have some more attachments here you want to go over before we start questioning?
I do. The next one's not an attachment. You were asking what the cost would be for the steps. And, what's put in the budget is for employees to get step increases effective July 1st. So for a 6-month period from July 1 through December 31st. And that would be a half year, and that would be $80,000 is what we've got the cost of that. And again, we have some employees who are at the very top who don't get step increases. If you come down the ladder, you're closer to the top, your steps are smaller. The farther you get down to being a new employee, your steps are larger. We're trying to get you up to market rate. But that is the cost, $80,000. I would recommend strongly that we keep that. I understand and appreciate why both 2020 and 2021 do not include any adjustments to the scale. But I think given the work that our employees do and given the study that we had done a couple of years ago, showing us behind our peers, I think that those steps are an essential part of our compensation plan. I take any questions on that.
You mentioned, you said you figured the steps with, they're going to effect on July 1st is what you said?
Correct. That's when our pay plan kicks in for all of our increases.
Okay. Well, yeah, Mr. Allman was good enough to send me the numbers, and I came out with a number very similar, very close to yours, within $2,000. So I think that's reasonable, but I don't know. That's I'm having some trouble with that. Okay, we haven't even decided. We do not know. We are in the process of bargaining with the police department now. We're also in the process where sometime during 2021 we're going to be bargaining with the firefighters also.
They still have a contract through 2021. We'll be bargaining with them for a new contract effective 1/1/22.
So we'll be bargaining with them sometime late in 2021.
We'll be starting
Right.
during the year of 2021.
So I'm not sure, I'm seeing the whole picture. I guess the number that Ron gave me was for the audited numbers of 2019. So we don't so I'm not sure if I'm working off of the same base as he is, but.
Well, Ron can maybe comment on that. The steps are only for non-represented employees. And that would include non-represented police and fire employees, the management, and anybody who's not part of the union.
Yeah,
But I'm not sure exactly what data you're talking about.
I'm aware of that, but I was trying to find the total picture, Steve.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's not only non-union, you also have to, so if you're trying to get at take it off. Who's not covered, affected by the pay scale, it's non-union, but you also have to throw in, people like temporary street workers, the council, there's a whole list of people. So what I came up with based on our last 2019 audit is 46.3% are not affected by any pay changes because they're either union, they're temp, they're council, and those kind of things.
But so you say those people that you just mentioned are in the 12,779 figure you gave me, right?
You had asked for just what is the union?
No, I'd asked for the total payroll, including union.
Well, I provided you the union payroll for 2019, which is about 12.2 million. So if we're back to, I think the point is about 46% are on the pay scale.
Okay, thank you. Proceed.
Okay, the next item that was in your packet and the next one that was requested in the last meeting was vehicle and equipment purchases. And what I gave you just for you to look at is the fact that we have been through some of this. And I know it came up last time. Has the council been heard with some of these concerns? It was talked about the CIP process. You have in your packet some information about the CIP where some fire and police vehicles were backed up. They weren't purchased. They've been moved back to future years. The schedule's been modified as a result directly of the concerns that this body raised. And with respect to non-public safety, you heard Chris a minute ago talk about some of the things that he's facing there. His initial plan, I think, called for about $710,000 or $715,000 worth of expenditures. And I asked him to keep it to $650,000. That's the amount we trim to every year. And that's what he presented. And we talked about earlier tonight, those 6 items. So, I mean, I think that the point has been made. The ISF is something we're going to talk about more, I can tell, as time passes. What the fund balance is. Ron presented something tonight about how we can perhaps reduce our borrowing with excess funds in a way that will help us save interest costs. But beyond that, I'm not sure exactly what to answer about vehicle and equipment purchases unless you have a specific question.
Ron. Yes.
I just want to throw in something. You almost need a good flow chart to see how the internal service fund works. But in my mind, it'll have more cash, but it'll never have excess cash. And the way to explain it like this, if no equipment is used during the year, no money flows into the internal service fund, and that makes sense because you don't have to replace anything. However, if we buy something super expensive and a department uses it like crazy, it gets charged a lot and more money flows into the internal service fund. And that also makes sense because we're going to have to replace a really expensive piece of equipment faster. So it can have more cash, but I think the state Wisconsin schedule does a nice job of being true. So if it did have a lot of cash any particular year, to me, that says that's because we use some really expensive equipment that's we're wearing out faster. So to me, it's kind of self-balancing, and more cash doesn't necessarily mean excess cash.
Mr. Bucky.
I can't help but think we're not being heard on this. Mr. Bargender mentioned about a vehicle. Can we get 2 more a year, 1 or 2 more? And I don't think he'd be asking that question if we weren't in this situation. People are hurting out there. With this COVID, there was a lot of people furloughed and so on and so forth. And this is special. This is what's going on this last year. Like I said earlier, I wouldn't be asking for these cuts probably if it was a regular year. But we have to do something. I mean, somebody's got to get out there and talk to the people. I have talked to the people, and there's a lot of them hurting.
I don't think we're automatically replacing, and I get what you're saying. I don't think we're automatically replacing vehicles and equipment any more than I know of just because it hits a 10-year useful life. I mean, and that's what would really bother me if I was sitting where you are, Tom, to know that the manufacturer says it is a 10-year useful life. So in 10 years in a day, we just go out and buy another one. I'm not an expert in the equipment that Chris and Pat and Pete and others deal with. I have to depend on them, but I've imparted on them. I've had conversations. I had a Zoom meeting with the chiefs and the chair of the Fire and Police Commission. I've imparted on all of them that we want to get the most we can. Now, if a vehicle or a piece of equipment is incurring ridiculous maintenance costs, I mean, there's a point where I think I made a joke at one of the earlier meetings. I have a 2005 Saturn that I hope I can keep for a long time, but if they tell me certain things need to be done, it's gone. And so we want to make sure we're not spending good money after bad. But without talking about specific pieces of equipment that you have in mind that you're seeing us replace before their time, I'm not sure how to answer. It's not being evasive to you. I'm just not sure how to specifically respond.
Yeah, Tom.
And I'm not questioning it all. I believe what Chris told us, and I fully agree with it. But again, it's a special time, folks.
Here's,
If it's your desire, we can take a look back at the list that Chris. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
okay, you've got a bunch of equipment reductions here, okay, in the, in the CIP.
Right.
What disappoints me about that is, I'm not quite sure how the 2023 CIP reduces our mill rate for 2021. I'm not sure how any of this will actually help. And I don't know, do you have for us, if we had accepted every one of your proposals you put in here tonight, can you tell us what that would do to the mill rate and how that would improve the situation we've got right now?
Improve the vehicle and equipment replacement?
No. Improve the burden that is going to be placed on the taxpayers for 2021. How does that help? I mean, I haven't seen, I see maybe we'll reduce 1 mil in the travel, if 118,000 or close to 1 mil would be reducing in travel. I see, and then we're basically saying we're going to buy some equipment that we're going to borrow for in 2021. We're going to buy that with the internal service fund. But how does that help? That helps that we don't have to borrow in 2021, but it doesn't reduce the tax rate until 2022 or 2023. So how are we doing this, Steve?
Well, no, and when you talk about the Internal Service Fund 701, I mean, it doesn't have that immediate impact. I mean, the purchases are being made. If we decide we're not going to buy 2 of those items on the list that Chris was just talking about, that does not have an immediate impact on the tax rate or anything you're talking about tonight. It has a longer term effect in terms of how much we have to borrow from ourselves and take from that fund, the status of the fund. Do we need to put more money into the fund? But it doesn't give the relief you're talking about to the taxpayer right now because it's not a general fund item.
Why are we here?
So yeah, no, and I get that people are hurting in the community. I understand that. And when we're talking non-general fund, we're not talking about a specific item that's going to directly impact them.
Mr. Mayor.
So, I guess this is kind of where I'm at because I think Mr. Butke said it very well. It just seems like we're not being heard. And I think that's what the public maybe is. And I'm going to go back to, and I'm sorry I have to bring up travel again. But the reason I've stayed with just one thing the whole time, that's been the theme. And if you look at it, what you just told me is that we can go down from 170,000 down to 40. Now, we could now, and we've got to meet somewhere there. My question is, how many other parts of the budget are like this, where we could go down on maybe our expenses are, maybe they don't need to be this, maybe they can be lower. The reason I stick with just one is because then it's very, very clear. We can see what it is. I'm just wondering if there's other parts of our budgets here that are, for me to go from 40,000 to 170,000, that's really, really hyperinflated in my book. And we've got to meet, I think, somewhere in between because we don't want to cut it too low. That part I completely get. That's my fear, is how much more are we letting it in? And I'll be very honest with you, is because one of the things that I have a very difficult time with is the fact that we've talked about no raises, and there's a part of there for a discussion and or for the steps. I'm not a big fan of that because when you come here at 7:30 on a Sunday morning and you see hardworking people here, they're not the people to cut, in my opinion. But I think we can find it. I don't know. It's getting more and more frustrating to get through this.
But let me address that a little bit. I think we've been through a number of years with rather small, tame general fund expenditure increases, and that's part of how we got here. We've been holding the line as best we can because we haven't been increasing the tax rate. I don't think there's a whole lot of fat or fluff in this budget anymore. I'm not saying you can't go in there and say, Steve, do we need to spend $5,000 on that? Do we need to spend $8,000 on that? But given the scope of a $22.5 million general fund, I don't think you'd find a whole lot that you'd grab onto and say this is unnecessary. Although you might say it wouldn't fit into the priorities you're thinking of in every case. But the travel and training, we got to find a good spot. Your focus is just anything that meets the certification or license, everything else is out. I haven't delivered what you asked me to deliver, a dollar amount. If this body says we want every single dollar get down to verified certifications and licenses and nothing more, you're not going to one training session, one conference, one webinar, whatever, we can take that additional savings and apply it any way you want to after this meeting, to tax relief, to general fund reserves, to whatever it is, if that's where you want to go. I'm not advocating for that, and I know that some of you are, because I think that that's short-sighted in the long run in terms of growing our staff and growing what we do. I say it again, I've worked in 3 decades in government, and I can't tell you how many things I've seen come from conferences and seminars in terms of eye-opening things about how it's done in other cities, road maintenance, protecting our computer systems, whatever. But I'll follow your direction, and whatever you want to go for. I apologize again, Bob, but whatever you want to go for, just tell us what you want to do. Vote as a group. It's nothing more than certifications and licensing, and we'll bring that number, that extra number, whatever that is that we calculate, will be applied where you want it to be applied.
Ms. Spiros, were you trying to be recognized?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just trying to, I don't have access to those documents y'all are looking for because I don't think that they got scanned to our email, but I do have a question about what we're doing this evening as far as procedurally. We're starting to talk, meat and potatoes here, and I don't know if we should be commenting at that point in time that we want that cut or what. I go back to Mr. Bartender's comments earlier this evening. He had, I thought, some really good direct questions about a couple of different purchases, but then there was really no direction given. So are we saving that all towards the end of the meeting, or are we supposed to be suggesting these as we go?
Well, thank you. My assumption of looking at the agenda, the way the agenda was structured, we were going to hear reports from the staff, which is the point that we're at right now. And that basically we would discuss if we felt those were adequate, and if they weren't, then now the floor is basically open to the council to determine what they think is adequate and what they want to do to deal with it. But I will do that only on the grounds that Mr. Barg feels that he's made his case, and if you're done with making your case, then we'll go to the other one.
Yeah.
Does that help, Becky?
Yes, thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome. Okay. Basically, we don't really know what changes to the mill rate or to the taxes are going to be done if we accept any and all of these proposals that have been put before us. Basically, what I'd like to know from the council is generally, what are your feelings toward this? Do you feel we have to do more? Do you feel we have to do less? What do you want to do? Where do you want to go from here? Can you be satisfied to live with the mill rate that was presented with us before, with the budget that was presented to us before? And if you are, let's vote, set up the hearing and accept the budget and go at it. If not, let's figure out what we're going to do and how far we want to bring it. So I'll open the floor. Who wants to be recognized first? Don't all speak at once, I can't hear you. Okay, Mr. Bargainer.
I guess I'll go first here. Tonight, we were presented with budget reductions of $189,673. If I'm doing the math right, and each percent decrease in the 4.5% would equal $130,000. That would mean that if we cut $189,673, that would equal to about 1.46% of that 4.5%. Does that sound right? Steve's giving me the yes. Okay. Okay. So I guess this is just me thinking here, and I recommend that each council member, come up with their own ideas here. But I thought about this long and hard over the last week here since we've been down here, and I agree with Tom Butke. The community is suffering. Not everybody, but there is people that are really suffering. When I see the newspaper that the need at the food pantries is going up 30%. Okay, that's a big increase. Okay, sometimes, we're all sheltered to a certain degree. We don't really see what's going on out in the real world all the time. Okay, but we have to have some sympathy for the public, for the taxpayers, for the elderly, for the people on fixed incomes. Okay, for the disabled people, all that. Okay, so what I'm thinking here, if we did from the 4.5, we're getting down to 3. If we can get that, if we can split that down in half to 2.25 total cuts, okay? I think we need another 100,000 or something like that to do that. I guess I'd be comfortable with that. I don't know, and I'm just speaking for myself, but I'd really like to hear input from each council member here tonight, what their thoughts are, and the mayor, what their thoughts are, and if we could live with something like that. So I'm going to surrender the floor. You guys have at it.
Can I see a hand go up down here? Go ahead. Tom, you're up.
I'll agree with Ken.
Mr. Wetzel.
Thank you. I'm looking at two numbers. I'm looking at the original proposed 4.5%, 43 cents per thousand. I'm looking at the scary 8.1%, 77 cents per thousand. And I'm looking at the fact that our administrators come forth with a minor increase, if you will, at a 4.5%, but in our financial director is saying, really, we need to have a lot more than that. And I sort of feel like we're in that proverbial stuck between the rock and the hard place situation. There's no doubt that the community is not suffering, as has been mentioned. I just real briefly want to go back to what the mayor was saying, and I think that it's been sort of lost. We have a budget, and first of all, I want to thank the staff and the administrator for putting together the budget. Just as a side note, I'm disappointed that things are so clumped together and seem like they're getting more clumped together. I wish we had a little more detail. Just a side note here, an example on page, what is this? Page 33 of the budget, the Common Council section. All of a sudden we have one line item instead of what we had before, which was 8 items. Everything's lumped together. If I go down a few more pages to the administrator's budget, again, that's been lumped together. So instead of having 4 different line items, we're down to 1. I think we're going the wrong way. I think we need a little more detail. And an example of that was when the mayor asked for more detail on the travel and training. We need to have some of that additional detail. But back to my original point here, what the mayor brought up was a microcosm. He brought up one thing, travel and education or travel and training, and said, if we look at one thing, how much can we reduce? And it seems as though we could potentially reduce a fair amount in that one area. That one area is one little part of this whole budget. The whole budget includes a whole lot more other areas. And I would really like to see some real creative discussion happening within the staff and department areas to say, okay, if we can reduce travel and training by this amount, can we reduce supplies? What else can be reduced? We don't have, and quite frankly, I don't want a detailed budget that tells me how many paper clips we have. But we don't have enough detail to say, let's look at this area and let's look at this area. We're hoping that the staff can do that. And I think that by looking at more than just travel and training, perhaps there's more that can be pulled out of this. Yes, it is time to pay the piper. Yes, we do have to raise taxes, as much as I hate to see that in this moment of COVID. But we've got to look at everything we can, because we're not just looking at a 4.5 or now 3.0 potential increase to meet what was proposed. But in the grand scheme of things, we're looking at a much bigger hole that needs to be patched. The sooner we can patch it, the more we can shore up our situation here financially, the better it's going to be in the long run when it comes to Moody's and the way that they view us, when it comes to future borrowing, all of those, it's a ripple effect. So the sooner we can get fully fixed, the better. So I guess at that point, that's all I'm going to say until somebody else gets me fired up on something else. Thanks.
Anybody? As I understand what, oh, go ahead, Mayor. Believe me, I'm happy to hear your hand up.
Ron, can you go up there for just a second so I can ask you? So if we're understanding maybe some of these reductions, now our product goes from, I forgot what you said the other day, $10.33. Maybe this gets us down to $10.30. But we've been selling it at $9.54. To Mr. Witzel's point, even if we bring down those expenses, we still have to make up for the decade, right?
Right.
So if we cut that down too much, before we didn't know we were making that mistake, now we're knowingly making that mistake. And that's a different point of view. This still hurts. I mean, 43 cents. Is that on the right track? I mean, I understand everybody, we're trying to get this to cut. But if we just make that gap bigger, we're no better ahead than we were. Or is that accurate? Or is that not accurate?
No, yeah, it's, a couple things. If you don't mind me taking a minute or two.
Please.
So first of all, in the travel, I think it's a false dichotomy to call everything certification or non-certification, because there's some things like, for example, we're getting brand new software. So you'd be saying the entire, we're going to install new software, but nobody's going to be trained to use it. So maybe a different differentiation is maybe essential training. So I wouldn't extrapolate that to, the entire budget's 75% overboard. So if you look back at how we got here, is what happened this year is we started with a deficit, and the real cause of the increased deficit are three things. One, we went out for a major borrowing for the pool. Two, we lost interest revenue. And three, we lost transportation aids. General fund expenses are exactly the same. So that's what kind of caused the deficit. One strategy would be, why don't we just use our reserves? Well, we don't have reserve. We have, our policy is 25 to 30% fund balance. We're at 16 as of the last audit, and 11 or 12%, if you consider the debt service deficit. If you look at the Moody's credit rating, there's the big credit rating, but there's like 15 little sub-ratings underneath that kind of add up to the total rating. And there's one called cash as a percentage of revenue. And if long story short, if we were rated solely on that, we'd be about 3 grades lower, because it's so low in comparison to our peers and kind of standards. So we don't have the reserves to hold it out. And what I keep hearing is if we reduce $1, we can cut $1 off the levy. That's not correct either, because a big chunk of this deficit is debt. we can't. We're not funding our debt. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's where I said at the very beginning, we're actually talking about two different levies.
Right.
And basically, if we can maintain the levy for the debt service at a healthy rate, we can reduce the pain to the taxpayers by taking it off of the operations portion. That's what I said at the beginning, and I thought you heard me.
Right, and, so really, I think staff's done a good job. Any year you can hold general fund expenses zero. We did a good job, I thought, from the start. For expenditure restraint, we'd be allowed 2.1%. So that's just kind of the, factoring in what we could use. And we can't get back in a year. I mean, it's just not possible. Like I said previously, we'd have to raise the levy up to something like 1025 and cut out $700,000-800,000 more out of the general fund if we wanted to break even this year. So that's not even possible. I mean, I think what the mayor's saying is, and maybe a little bit, Tom, I don't want to redirect what you said, is, how do we stop the trend? And this isn't perfect because there's a lot of variables floating around in here. But just to give you, for instance, this is pretty close. I was trying to add up everything that was being said. Even at a tax rate increase of 4.5%, which I kind of call the tread water, we have a combined deficit of $1.2 million. So that's cash we're budgeting goes out the door in excess of the revenues we're taking in on already kind of a short fund balance. So that's just kind of a point there. So we start talking lower, then I start wondering things like, well, what happens when the general fund runs out of cash? What do we do then? And keep in mind, 2020 looks like it's going to be okay, financially for us. One more number. If you look, and I always like to go back to the audit because I don't like to speculate. If you look at the 2019 audit, the general fund had $1.2 million in cash. And the debt service fund had a $1 million deficit. And that's our main operating funds right there. So we do not have great reserves that we can lean on. Other places do. So now I'm just kind of I'm babbling here, but I'll open it back up to questions. That's just kind of how I see it.
The deficit in the operations fund is the cash, not just the cash that we have, it's the cash that we can get. But there are two ways to reduce that, and that's to raise to the maximum amount we can levy, and we're talking just about the operations budget here. We're not talking about the debt service, okay? But the other way to do it is reduce expenditures so that you don't have to raise that levy as much to add to the deficit. And one other question, and I said this right at the very beginning, and I saw you shake your head. I thought you were agreeing that the 45 cents or so that you want to increase the levy by that includes both operations and debt. How much of that is just debt?
Yeah. So the reason I keep the two narratives separate because they have different causes and different fixes. Yeah, at the end of the day, you set the rate, and then we would work through our levy limit worksheets to figure out where to put the deficit because you want to be strategic about it. Largely, it would go to debt. Any tax increase largely goes to debt. But again, we got to be strategic about it. So you set the rate at $9.97 or whatever it is. We'd still have to work through. We have to work through what bucket we put it in. Because I guess explain a little bit more is you're only allowed a little increase in the general fund every year. Yeah. And if you don't take that, you'll kind of strangle yourself. So, our biggest unfunded is debt. But when push comes to shove, when I get the number, we'll try to be smart about it.
So what is that number, or what is that percent that we can raise the levy without strangling ourselves, as you say?
Sure. So there's two parts to the levy limit. The first part is how much the levy can go up in the general fund. Yeah. I didn't even look it up because I think it's 2%. It's 2%. Plus we can levy for all our actual debt.
2% above the actual expenditures of last year.
2% above the dollar levy in the general fund last year.
Okay,
So I guess what I'm saying is, in theory, the max, I didn't calculate it, I said I didn't calculate it last time, but if you take our current rate, 2% for general fund plus all our debt, in theory, you would have the authority to raise the rate up to something like 1040 or something. I mean, because we've not funded our debt for so long, you could levy for that at any time, plus 2% increase in the general fund. I mean, just theoretical maximums.
yeah, we certainly could, but we have a community to support too.
Oh, absolutely.
That is our burden, not yours, apparently. I mean, we're the ones that have to make those decisions about how much we want to tax the community.
Oh, absolutely. I was just giving you how it works.
Mayor,
If, so you're proposing a 45 cent. Mr. Bargender said if that goes down to 2.5, so, and 25 cents, what would that, if you did go down there, what would that mean? That what would at 45 cents, you said it goes to 1.2 deficit?
Correct.
So what would going to 25 cents do?
Correct. And let me tell you, again, this all has to be worked through everything. All I did was I made myself a grid of, expense reductions in the rates. So this is an approximation, but at a 2.2% tax increase, the overall deficit, with all the cuts that Steve mentioned, and repurposing all the things he mentioned, I have for a deficit of 1.5 million.
1.5 million? And that's a deficit in the debt service fund.
That's combined. Again, when we get the number, we put the levy dollars where it makes most sense.
Let's talk for just a second about the deficit in the debt service fund.
Yep.
Okay. So what happened is we have to replenish the debt service fund because we were using funds that weren't allocated towards that for years to come. Do we have enough money, or are we levying enough money to pay all of our debt for 2021 from the debt service fund?
No, that would be
What's our deficit there?
1,087,000. It's keeping this rate the same. I've had 954. So basically, if you take what was levied into the debt service fund last year, no change, and our actual debt payments for 2021, we have $1,087,000 shortfall in the debt service fund itself.
And that would be roughly 7 or 8 mills to make up that deficit, right? At $130,000 a piece.
That was the 1025 or 1026 rate I was mentioning. To fully fund our debt would that alone would be, what is that, 71 or 72 cents just to fund our debt. But you're right, we started with a deficit and then we took out a major borrowing. And we're short.
Yeah, we've got a major, we took on what, $6 million in borrowing in 2020, right?
Correct, yep.
So if we want to pay all our debt, we need to, okay, but leave operations over here for a minute. If we want to pay all our debt in 2021, how many mills will it take to pay that before we start talking about adding or subtracting mills for city operating?
It would be about 71 cents to the mill rate, 1025, 1026.
And that's to pay, in other words, if we didn't do that, then to pay our debt, we would have to draw against our reserves again.
Correct. It's a dollar for dollar. Every dollar we don't pay on our debt comes out of our reserves.
That's correct. So we're back to what Mr. Witzel was talking about. That even if we went with the 45 cents that they were talking about, we aren't going to have enough money to pay the debt. We're going to be drawing our reserves down to almost nothing. Okay, so that's where we stand. Has everybody got that? I mean, I wanted to make it clear where we're at. Okay, let's see, who's that? Mr. Peschel? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I'm glad that Ron's explaining this so well because I actually can understand what he's saying to us. We're in a deep hole and he's suggesting a way that we can dig our way halfway out of the hole. Not all the way out of the hole, but halfway out of the hole. I think that maybe in the past, the person in his position wasn't explaining things well enough for the council to understand the hole that they were digging, and they just kept digging deeper and deeper and deeper. I think that the budget that has been presented to us by the city finance people, by Steve Barg, is a fair budget. It doesn't raise over what we've done last year, what we spent last year. I forget what the figure you said was, but it was minimal.
2%.
I think that that's a sign that the department heads have taken seriously cutting various aspects of the budget, because we all know that the cost of doing business hasn't gone down, it's gone up. So I think that the various department heads have done a fine job of cutting waste from the budget. I'm willing to make a motion that we accept the budget as presented with the changes that were presented to us tonight, and we approve that budget.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Fire. Open for discussion, let's see, Mr. Witzel and then Mr. Bucky. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were reaching for your microphone. Okay, go ahead.
So my turn?
Yeah, Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. I just want to be clear on what you're proposing change-wise, because we heard a lot of different things thrown out there. We heard a reduction listed here. Travel, we heard the potential reduction of no staff increases. I guess I'm not exactly sure what, because not everything was on here.
I'm talking about these things that are on the
So we had 5 different items that were discussed, that were asked about last meeting. This, I think, covers, 2 of them, and these are the only changes you're recommending?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr., could I ask a question for clarification too?
Yeah.
You're talking about essentially the 45-cent levy, right? Is that what you're talking about?
The budget that was presented to us 2 weeks ago.
Which was the 45 cent, right?
Yes, less these items.
Right. Further discussion? Mr. Barkender.
Thank you, Chair. For Ron, last year we raised taxes 3%, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and if I recall, it was a proposed, we started out at like 2%, we went 2% and then we raised 1%. Was that 1% for debt services? Was that, how did that work again? Just recap this. Maybe we can use that formula this year. I don't know.
Again, I think really our strategy last year was like, we just wanted to buy time and, not where we directly put it, but we're still making a lot of changes. And we thought, I don't know if we got that specific, thought 3% would just give us a time to look at options where we refinanced our debt. But again, it doesn't go into a specific bucket when you approve it because we have to work through it. So the 3%, if I recall correctly, was just kind of a, let's move it up and see what our options are for next year.
Follow up, please.
Mr. Barkender, go ahead.
Follow up. Oh, okay. So, Mr. Peschel is talking about right now, he's talking about the 4.5% less the 1.46, or about 1.5%, that bring us back down to 3%. Is that what we're talking about, 3%?
I think that's the number you came up.
Right, I think.
I'm just saying whatever it is.
Correct. But as a clarification, the rate would go up 4.5% and our expenses would go down, all the cuts that are down. So what we're looking at, I believe Nick's proposal is the 4.5% that Steve proposed, and then cut all the expense items, and then the internal service purchase of those items is, I'm understanding the motion.
Yeah, I don't know if this reduces the 4.5% by taking this off or not.
No, it reduces, that would reduce our expenses, reduce the deficit in the general fund.
Yeah.
Is that Mr. Hendler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's very interesting discussions tonight, and I think most of us learned a little more than we did in the past in understanding the level of detail in developing a budget. One of the things, though, that I am very concerned about is, sure, we can entertain Mr. Peschel's motion, but in that case, I would like to amend the motion because there are things that would have a real impact, and signs of sincerity on our part is to have no salary increases for staff other than the union staff. So that would be my amendments, Chairman.
That's, and then you're talking about what, the step increases, is that what you're saying?
Step increases or the 1%, whichever.
I think the 1% has already been taken off the table. So I
Okay,
think
then it's a
you're talking
step increase.
increases. Is there a second to that motion? Motion by Mr. Buckey?
No.
Okay, we have an amendment on the motion on the floor, and we're talking about that right now. Anybody else wish to be heard on that? Mr. Wetzel?
Yep, all yours.
Thank you. This is a really, really, really tough amendment. And I understand that the staff is working really, really hard. The thing that I find really, really difficult is look my constituents in the eye and say, hey, look, we're giving you the biggest tax increase you've had in, dare I say, decades, and the staff's getting a raise as well. When the majority of those constituents have not seen an increase, will not see an increase, and if anything, have seen a decrease because of furloughs and layoffs. So this is a really, really, really difficult thing because I'm looking at the people in this room right now, and I know that it affects you all directly. Well, most of you, I think there's a couple of citizens in here, but the point is, it's a really, really, really difficult decision, and it's not a decision that I want to make or that I'm taking lightly.
Discussion, Mr. Mayor.
From a budget standpoint, I appreciate what's trying to be done. There's something wrong, in my opinion, about represented employees getting raises and others not. It's very hard to look city staff in the eye and not have those raises there. Now, I do understand some places do furloughs and things like that. I get that, but are we going to make the same mistake that we made when we let incomes go down so low that we had to have a study done, which Mr. Wagner loves those studies. And then we have to play catch up. So we're putting ourselves again where we're going to go and we're going to catch up. We are putting ourselves in a position where we knowingly are telling ourselves we're going to fall back and then we're going to have to catch up down the road. So I don't know, that one's a tough one, especially when there's another part there of morale of your workforce. And we say, and we do, we listen to the people out there at the coffee clutches and the McDonald's, and you got your hot apple pies and whatnot. We hear them, but we also hear the people that we work with. And it's tough for me to say, you can't have a raise when I drive by here at 7:30 on a Sunday morning and there's people in there working. I don't know.
Mr. Buckey.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Wetzel and I agree with the mayor, but I'm going to come back. It's special times. There's been people out there that have been furloughed and these people, I said this last time, these people work very hard. They deserve raises. And I will pledge, if I'm on the council, as soon as we get out of this crisis, that we're going to pay these people what they deserve to get. But I just can't do that now. I got to find a way to do this. And you're not going to get sympathy from a lot of citizens out there. It's just not there.
Mr. Mayor, you can rebut.
And so what if we send it back to city staff? What if we send it back to them and say that the steps are going to cost us, I think you said earlier, $80,000 and a 1% is going to cost us, I don't know, Steve, do you have that number? What, 1%? Roughly?
Roughly the same.
So 160,000. What if we send it back to them and say, you find $160,000 in expenses, and then to cut, and then when you cut, then we could just, if we were going to pay it here anyway, then we just take it from, as Mr. Witzel said last year, you take it from one bucket and you put it into another bucket. I think that could be a way to solve both issues, but it's an idea.
Mr. Bucky, Mr. Henry, you didn't want to join in, did you?
It was me.
Okay, fine.
And I fully agree with that. I'd be willing to remove my second and Mr. Handler if it comes to that. But I fully agree with doing that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bucky, we got to dispose of the motion before once you put it on the floor, the group owns it, so we can't do that. So, who's that? Mr. Peschel? Yeah. Mr. Peschel, the reason I'm having trouble is I'm getting two reflections. I see two hands on the glass up there, and I'm not sure which Peschel I'm recognizing. So forgive me for messing that up.
Thank you. I can't support that, the amendment to the motion of not paying our employees more money. I'm aware that one of our major employers in the city earlier this summer settled a contract. I don't know the details of that, but I assume that there was a pay raise involved in that. I'm aware that one of our other major employees just last week, I believe, announced a 1% across the board raise for all of their employees, and a promise to look at it again in early spring. I'm also aware that they look at the steps as they go along and see if they're comparable to their comparables. I just had service done at two different places on my vehicles, and I know that the labor rate has gone up. So I think that everybody else is paying their employees what they're worth. And yes, there are furloughs, have been some layoffs, but I think that we cannot look at our employees as being, I guess, I don't know how to put it, not valued. That they are just lucky to have a job, which is a phrase I've heard many times in my career. So I will not support the amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Bucky?
When have you heard that on the council? Anybody say that, Mr. Page? That we don't think they should get raises? Don't put words in my mouth.
Mr. Mayor?
Steve and Ron.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Steve and Ron, if it is put to you to go find 100 and where we could swap it, where you can go find $160,000 of reductions so that you can add those in there, is that feasible with what you have? Or is it not?
A couple things. First of all, I appreciate Mr. Peschel's comment earlier about the budget, the work that's been done to get to this point. And I won't distract for too long. I just need to make this point that by bringing you a budget that initially had a 0.4% increase in the general fund expenditures, and now with these cuts is at zero. I mean, you have to realize how much has been trimmed to get to that point. We have union contracts that have pay increases we don't control. We have refuse, recycling increases. We have all these increases, health insurance. That to get to where you're talking about right now, if you accept these cuts at $0 increase over last year and how much we're going to spend, a lot has been cut to get to that point. So I just want you to understand and want people at home to understand that didn't happen by itself. Back to your question, I respect what you're trying to do, but it's a really awkward position to put city staff in to talk about going to find cuts to, support an increase in pay. I mean, I think if I were a member of the public, I'd question that in terms of, okay, so they weren't going to cut this otherwise. They thought it was important to us to have this mowing down in the parks more often or whatever it is, because they're trying to fund an increase in salary. It just sounds counterintuitive to me to what I think would be a reasonable expectation. And I'm talking as a citizen at that point, as much as I'm talking in terms of a staff person who would feel really uncomfortable.
I'm going to butt in for a point of order here, and I've been trying to figure this out. It's true we have the main motion on the floor from Mr. Paschal, and then we've got the amendment from Mr. Handler. The only motion that can take precedent over those two is a motion to recommit with instruction. So if you want to mess with that, okay. If you don't, we'll just go ahead and hear these two and clear the floor, okay? So Mr. Handler?
Could you explain that, please?
In parliamentary procedure, there are certain orders that there's a precedence of
Oh, I see. It's on page 396, right?
397, go away. Anyway, I've fallen for that one beforehand where I'm not doing it again. But so essentially, the easiest thing to do would be to dispose of the amendments on the floor as they are, and then open the floor for another amendment, okay? Or for another motion. Okay, so where's Mr. Handler? Go ahead. And it's not on 397.
I understand. However, I do like the mayor's suggestion, and I think it was good. I'm sorry, Your Honor, I finally agreed with you. If you could take this back, Mr. Chairman, if we could give that back to the people in charge.
Well, let's get rid of the motions on the floor first, and we'll take care of that, okay?
Fine.
Okay. Is there any more discussion on the amendment? If not, are you ready to vote? If you are ready to vote, we'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Fire,
No.
Paschal,
No.
Rosendich,
No.
Bargender,
No.
Wagner,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes.
Fisher,
No.
Spiros,
Yes.
Budke,
No.
Handler.
This is a tough one. No.
Okay, I take it the
That was
no,
on the amendment, right?
that's on the amendment.
Okay.
So it is not amended. Now the original motion is to accept it, and with the changes that Steve presented earlier this evening. Steve?
Thank you. I want to clarify something that was discussed earlier between a couple of members of the council and Ron. The city staff, Ron and I in particular, would never recommend using additional cuts in these reductions in cost as a means of trying to do tax reduction, because we really believe that getting up to 4.5% is important for us. I mean, it's going to be our starting point for next year, and we'd like to see you use whatever savings you see tonight or beyond tonight used to help us with the general fund deficit, quite frankly. I mean, we've seen the numbers that we're facing, and we have a significant deficit no matter how this turns out. So we're always going to be advocating that you go with the 4.5% to get us where we think we need to start working toward, regardless of how much savings or additional revenue comes into the picture. Having said that, the conversation that went on earlier with Mr. Bargander is fully valid. You could certainly use some or all of the savings to offset the increase in the tax rate. We just wouldn't recommend it because we don't think we're making enough progress toward the goal if that's what we do.
Any further discussion on the main motion? If not, Mr. Wetzel.
Thank you. It took us a long time to dig into a hole that we're in. Whether it's fuzzy debt service financing, whether it's lack of increases, whatever it is. And I know this isn't reasonable, but I'm going to just throw a what if kind of thing. We're essentially looking at a budget that does not increase expenses. If we had a crystal ball and we can say that's even possible for the next however many years, and we looked at this increase that we're potentially going to be putting on the taxpayers. How many years does it take us to dig out of this hole if we continue to do the same thing year after year?
That's a lot of math at one time.
Yeah.
That's a tough one because, so if you make a couple assumptions. So one is that general fund expenses will be 2% increase every year. You make another assumption that we get growth of 1%. We have a pretty small base there. And say, if you're saying 4.5%, it'll take a few years to get there because we're not only trying to catch up, but we still have things that are going to be going up every year. It's, to me, definitely not possible to have a 0% increase. We got really lucky with the health insurance this year and a lot of other things that Steve said, like we cut. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but probably 2 or 3 more years. And that's just asking me right here, trying to figure that all in my head. But the problem is really going to be we're going to be so short on cash. I mean, so even with this, like I said, so we have a $1.2 million deficit. So we're budgeting that we will spend through $1.2 million in cash this year. And in our 2022 budget, we start at $1.2 million in the hole before any other adjustments. So we'll eventually get there. How far our credit rating deteriorates by then, the question.
Any further discussion?
As a follow-up, if I may.
You.
And if our credit rating does continue to deteriorate based on this lengthy digging out, that will have a detrimental effect in that we'll have more interest to pay, which is sort of this ongoing loop of not really getting us out, but instead basically climbing on rock that's continuing to keep us in the hole.
Correct. And, if you read the credit rating, so they say, the first sentence, pressure on an already narrowed cash and fund balance and a structural deficit in the debt service. And you think of the conversation you have to have with someone trying to buy your bonds. The first 2 things you disclose is we don't have a lot of cash and we're not funding our current debt. That's why it's this kind of the cycle you're talking about. We won't fund our debts, so we'll burn through more cash, so we'll have less cash. It's just a spiral. We'll get there, but how will we look when we get there is the question. We're already down 1.5 ratings.
Thank you.
Are you ready for the question? The question is on the main motion of adopting the budget as presented by Steve with the changes there. Roll call vote, please.
Fire,
Yes.
Paschal,
Yes.
Rosendich,
No.
Bargender,
No.
Wagner,
No.
Witzel,
No.
Fisher,
No.
Spiros,
No.
Budke,
No.
Kendler.
No.
Motion fails. The floor is open for a motion, which Mayor, would you care to recommit with instructions?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Is there
What you said.
Is there a second? We'll discuss what the instructions are in a second, okay? Is there a second? Mr. Wetzel? What instructions do you have for them to do?
For city staff to go back through to see if there's a way that you can cut 160,000.
Mayor can't make a motion.
That's right.
What?
I can't make a motion.
No, well, you can make,
No, I can't.
I think in this body we can't we? Okay, all right. So, Mr. Handler, would you make that motion to recommit with instructions? And would the mayor like to discuss what instructions he'd like to see if he were to make a motion?
Is that okay?
He can discuss. Yes.
Well, if you were to do it, then I would just think a good thing would be to send this back to city staff to find the other $160,000 so that we can have the step increases as well as the 1% pay increase. if you are able to find the 160.
Mr. Himmler, are those your instructions?
What is that?
Yes, you're so eloquent. Thank you. Because this second from Mr. Bucky, yes.
Sounds like.
Okay. Any further discussion? Yes, Mr. Alman.
It sounds like we're putting so the cost of the step increase is 80,000. So when you say 160,000, it sounds like you're putting something that's not on the table already back on the table. Because we cut the 1% out on the first step. And the cost
I think he said it included that the budget would include the
Spiros wants to be recognized.
What?
Spiros wants to be.
Oh, Spiros, okay. Ms. Spiros, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm really confused what's going on right now because the 1% has been off the table.
Right.
That's not something we were discussing. I'm confused on the 160 also. Not that I mind the 160, but I would say that that they need to come back with 160 in either, cuts to operation or whatever they need to do, our operational budget, in order for us to give 80,000 in the step raise only. I'd still like to see the 160 cut though. That means we're making a cut and we're also able to afford the raise. Does that make sense?
Well, I think that's what if I'm understanding this correctly, that's what they're saying. We've already cleared the question of, as you said, it's the 1% step increases, or the step increases themselves are still in the budget, and I think it's making 160 cut without taking away that step increases.
So is that
Just the step increase, correct? Not the 1%. The 1% is a different raise.
No, there's no 1% on the table at all. There isn't any 1%.
Right. So it would be, they would cut 160,000, and for that, the employees would still get the $80,000 step increase, and the other 80,000 would be, say, a reduction in the travel, the education, the things that we discussed. They would need to find another, right?
No, it's 160 with they're looking for 160 extra without touching the raises at all.
Okay,
The way you stated it, they would be able to take the 80,000 for the raises, and that's not true. The raises are off the table. It's 160,000 without the raises.
Got you.
Go ahead, ma'am.
So is it then 80,000 would be for the step?
Yes.
Those steps would be in there. I guess my initial thing was to bring back the 1% as well, but if it's just to get the steps, and then I think that would be
right.
I think that would be good.
Steve, have you got it? I mean, are you making sense of this yet?
I think so. It's following the dialogue, and I was talking to Ron. So you're talking about cutting $160,000, and that would allow us to have the step increase effective July 1st, and also to have additional savings that, in other words, 50% of the savings would go to the employees to make the step increases work. Is that what's being talked about right now? Go ahead.
And is HAP on? I guess I'd like some opinion on whether kind of contingent compensation is allowed, because it sounds like, I don't know what it sounds like, but you're saying, well, you'll pay employees if we, I don't know what that sounds like to me. I would say, up to you.
I'll throw in one comment. We follow this body. Whatever you vote to do, we follow you. But it does put staff in a bit of a tough situation. I'll start with me at the beginning because, to get where we're at, we've had to make some cuts. I understand what the mayor's saying. One of the things we could do is go back to just things that either would be considered essential training, maybe not just certifications and licensure, but people trained to use our new software and so forth. But it's going to require other cuts that are going to involve reductions in service. I know it is, because I've seen the numbers. And I think it's going to be an awkward place to put staff in the position of recommending things that maybe I used, reduced mowing in the parks as an example. I just kind of took that off the top of my head. And that we're seeing, and you're seeing potentially embracing a philosophy of that nature, that we reduce services, at least to some degree, to fund our pay plan to the city. So I'll follow your direction, but I think that's a really awkward place to land.
Well, yeah, understand that what we were talking about is a $160,000 reduction in the operations budget itself, which may by definition require a reduction in services. So I think they need to understand that. I mean, if that's, you're right, Steve, that's what may have to happen. So, Mayor, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I guess this was the kind of the motivation behind it is originally, and we go back to travel and all that stuff at 170,000. Then you thought it could actually get down to 35 to 40,000, but it was revised to 118. So there's 78,000 there. And of course, we don't want to go that bare bones, but maybe you've got 50,000 right there. Now, but what I'm hearing from you two and your body language is very clear. This is kind of a no-go. If you don't think you can do it, don't waste our time. If you just want to keep it the way it is, then so be it. We were looking for a way to get those step increases back. If you don't think it's feasible, and Ron, when you said, is it even legal? If it's even remotely a question, then I thought this was because again, I go to, we could find $60,000. I'll be very candid with you. If we could find $60,000 in fluff when it's been revised, you can't tell me, even though I understand we kept it low and we're not going up. Well, maybe it was really inflated before. That very well could be. If we can't find it, we can't find it. I'm with you. But I just want city staff to be aware. We sure tried. But if you guys don't think we can do it, so be it.
So
I'm going to start and then I'll let Ron tackle it. Again, when you talk about the training and travel, my reference in the comments here, which was my best estimate from what I've seen just in general, was based upon certifications, recertifications, and licensing. If you broaden it to essential travel, and that's not what you're saying you're going to do right now, essential training, where you start counting other things that are of a nature that I mentioned hazmat with the fire department. It may not be required next week, but they need to be trained. The software that we bought, we need accounting staff and others to be able to use. I mean, if you start including that into what would be considered essential training, the dollar amount goes up. So I just wanted to make that part clear.
Yeah, and as far as, like Steve said, I think we're using a very, very narrow definition of certification. And expense cuts, fine, give us some direction. I'm just saying, don't tie it to my compensation,
I don't think that we ever actually did. Once we cleared the decks on that motion, there was no compensation.
Okay.
And his 160,000 did not include step increase.
Okay.
I don't know if I can say it any plainer.
So maybe I got lost in the motion myself there too, but.
Some people did.
So again, if, it's an expense cut, great. Some general direction would be good too, because I feel like, we have very few discretionary expenses, overtime, travel, supplies. And again, on the first pass, we did pretty well. So something that large, and you're probably talking at a service cut of, whatever our largest departments are, and maybe some direction there would be helpful.
Yeah, and just remember that the motion that was made by Mr. Paschal, which I realized died, or didn't make it to the finish line. I mean, that the budget, when he's referring to the budget that we presented, that includes those step increases. So if you're talking about funding the step increases and you're deciding you don't want to do it, that would be a removal of what's in there that you've been looking at for the past 2 weeks. That was in there. The 1% wasn't, but the step increases as of July 1st is in the budget that we've been talking about for the past couple meetings.
Okay, so the instructions are to go back and find $160,000, right? Not including step increases. I see heads nodding. I think I'm on the right track, okay? That's the motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion? If not, roll call vote, please.
Fire,
No.
Paschal,
No.
Rosendich,
Yes.
Bargander,
Yes.
Wagner,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes.
Fisher,
Yes.
Spiros,
Yes.
Budke,
Yes.
Pendler.
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries, so that is sent back. So that pretty much negates Steve, how much time are you gonna need?
Well, I'm sorry, Ron looked at his watch. I was just, well, I guess, probably, a few days to see if this is a viable thing to make work. Then we started talking about the schedule, and I'll defer to Ron at some point here. Our plan was to publish the budget on Saturday this week and then have the consideration of the budget be on Tuesday, November 24th. We can have another budget meeting. I assume we're gonna have another budget meeting. And that starts to play into the schedule. I don't know how much time we have in the back end. If we have, I think one year we had a budget meeting such that the approval of the budget wasn't until right after Thanksgiving. It does make it a tight time frame to get the tax bills out. But I think presumably we could do this within the next week and bring it back to make the timeline work to get the whole tax bill orchestrated thing done. I'll defer to Ron.
It would be very helpful to me if we could do this at the very beginning of next week. How's that? Does that?
I'll start right away looking to see if this is possible. I'll be talking to the leaders like I talk to every time. They're the key people here that we meet as a group. We'll probably have a meeting organized very soon, sometime tomorrow, after I do an initial look. So I would think, within just a few days, it's going to be known. If you want to try and schedule a meeting for, I don't know. No, that'll be too late. Well,
I'm just trying to, I don't remember the schedule. We're gonna run into, we're not gonna get the tax bills out on time. That's what we're gonna run into, and I don't have that entire schedule in my head right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if we can do it within a week, we'll probably be okay. If it gets after that, it's gonna be too, because Thanksgiving comes into play too. And admittedly, if we pass the budget on the 24th of November, right before the Thanksgiving weekend, we wouldn't be doing any work during that time anyway. So we may have a little bit of fudge time. I wouldn't say anything more than a week is viable though. So we need to make a decision within a week. And I would need to have something to you within a few days to look at.
I would like very much to do it a week from today if possible.
Okay.
Any other? That being the case, there's no further business before us, and the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
6 o'clock next Monday or? Okay.
Tuesday.
Motion to adjourn? What?
Rebecca's window.
Ms. Spiros, what did you have? You're up, please, Ms. Spiros.
I had a motion to adjourn.
Second by Butke, we are adjourned.